Tene da tanda tangbo chenamba kangala ngado tele kyugen la tene teji so doji chongtu mason dendengen la tika sa lama to jipe lama tamche la teba to muguji ni sorwa tap naroji.
First of all, I'd like to wish everyone good morning. And can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I'd like to wish everyone good morning, and then we will recite the Vajra lineage prayer. And so as we recite this prayer, please recite it with great faith and devotion in the root and lineage lamas. O Dorje Chanjen Telonarodan Marabamira Chudye Gamboba Amen.
Tene ta tanda tenju unta number jebate ta jerdo tanda ngaranso number sanji betawala tene shirot nawata dode pata sensam pata uma pate ta chitanga number ye sungriyo la di na ne ta tanda karire se na tanda tanda shirot nawata dode paniti tene tanda nyentu pata tene sensam pata uma paniti tipa chimborre la di na ne ta tanda zo tanda tipa chungu tanga tipa chimbo niga na ne tipa chimborre la tipa chimbo la sensam pata uma pa namba niya pa sumbe na ne ta kahege tene tanda chitanga sensam pe tawa re zunga rabo yore te yina ya sensam pe tawa ma re tene tanda tanda shamchu de nga te chitanga uma pe tawa re la uma pe tawa yinpe cherna uma pe tawa tong sensam pe tawa la chepar kare yore se na sensam pe tawa te la sen ngubu je sutupa che yinpar kelen pa che ta tene tanda umapa ge na chuetong ji tongni imbar kelen barela tene tanda de tongni imbar kyaji ki ba imbi chena umapa re.
So here this treatise, the differentiating the middle from extremes, is generally when we talk about the Buddhist view, there are four different main schools. There is the Great Exposition School, the Sutra School, the Mind-Only School, and the Middle Way School. And of these four schools, which is this treatise from? Well, this treatise, when we think about it, the schools of the Great Exposition and the Sutra School, that is the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika schools. The Great Exposition and the Sutra schools are the schools of the listener vehicle, whereas the mind-only and the middle way schools are from the great vehicle, the Mahayana. And so here, in terms of these two basic classifications of the foundation vehicle and the great vehicle, this is the great vehicle, the Mahayana view. And then within the great vehicle, we have the mind-only school and the middle way school. And so now some people say that this treatise is a mind-only text. But actually it is not. It is not a mind-only text. All of the five dharmas of Maitreya are texts of the middle way school, and they have the view of the middle way school. And so the difference between the views of the middle way school and the mind-only school is that in the mind-only school, they assert that the mind itself is a thing that is substantially existent. Whereas in the middle way school, all phenomena are said to be emptiness.
Tene ta te ya cerdo ndodon ho namba ni ge na ne ta so ho doji ti ba yin na tene tanda yedam jalai kerem komne tanda tene skapka la sanji menje la kor gomba ton tene papa chin rezi ji kor gomba ton je chin drum kor gomba la so pa tene kerem ge nam yo are la tene tanda ndi na la tene kerem ge nam yo me pa yin be cherna so ho doji ti ge lo mari Mari te yinaya songo doji tipa la ta jerem tong zorem ni gamju yo patanga tene shaja chimpe tingen se hine tong hlong tong ke tingen se gamju yo are la hine tong hlong tong ke tingen se gambe kapso tene ta tanda semje nelu ta tinane tangbo hine gam tene te je so hlong tong ke tingen se gambe kapsa la senji nelu ta ge yo are la senji nelu ta wa te senji ngo te rangin ke tomba imba ta rangin ke tomba te ya tomba pembo ta ba mai ba tene te tongchung ta ba mai ba salwa yi hi chin na ba ta dem ba ta ti ge nelu te gong ge yo are la te gomba te la ngi hi che ge cher to ta tanda umeke tawa la toni tombo toni te na papa che da toni te ya yi hi che na ba te na papa te ta tanda Oma Tela, Chitanga, Oma Rondon, Yendon Ni, Sungiwarella, Tinani, Oma Yendon, Tawatena Palne, Tinitati, Nihi, Yapo, Tine, Titaindo. Tene sanjine lu yapu je gom na tini tige gom ge tini tawa la pemba tawa la tini gomba la pemba shiro yungi yore la junsin teacher na tini chitang tanda tenjun de tusom jangba ma yinpa tini nyamlin ta jarna pe pento chembo yungi yore.
Now, generally, also in terms of the views of the sutras and the mantras, in the mantra, the secret mantra Vajrayana, we have the meditation of the creation phase of a deity, and through doing that we do the practices such as the practice of the medicine Buddha, or sometimes we visualize ourselves as Avalokiteshvara or as Green Tara, and we practice the creation phase visualization meditations in this way. Now, in this text, there is no presentation of any creation phase, and so this is not a Vajrayana text. But within the secret mantra Vajrayana, we do have the visualization practices of the creation phase, but we also have the completion phase practices. We have practices such as Dzogchen and Mahamudra, where we do tranquility and insight meditation. And when we are doing tranquility and insight meditation, then first we establish some tranquility meditation, then we do insight meditation on top of that, and we look at the essence of the mind. And when we look at the nature of the mind, then we see that the essence of the mind is naturally empty. But that natural emptiness of the mind is not just an inanimate emptiness. It's not just merely empty. There is also the aspect of clear wisdom that is present there. And so when we meditate upon that, that is the nature that we meditate upon. And so in order to really develop really strong certainty about that, then we first study the texts of the middle way. And through these we can come to understand that the essence of the mind is emptiness. But when we understand that emptiness, there are two different ways we can understand it. We can understand it through the Rangtong, or the self-empty school, or through the Shentong, other empty school. And here we primarily emphasize the Shentong, the other empty view. And if we do this, then when we meditate upon the nature of the mind, it will really help our meditation. Our meditation will help our understanding of the view. Our understanding of the view will help our meditation. And so that is why we study texts like this. We study and contemplate texts like this. And so studying and understanding them is good, but if we combine it with our practice, then it has even greater benefit.
Tene ta teya ta tambo tenju ji oni cha changwa je hyuna somsong la tene teya jagarki to mentra jagarki to tanda madhya and tambebanga karika peki to udong ta number je be leur sepa sinkinte ta chitang jagarki to yog bi junsin de kandire sena dojo gatemba zobu sung je jamden de jagar to sembare la tene te semba zom de mazi ta te jinju tene nyintu da chambata tene tanda zongni zipersi bi jintu la so ba jagar la chambare la junsin teacher na tene sanji jamden de je kayin banda bota sanji jamden de je ka mayin na yo tene te tabu ga dan sanji je ka dan tumba tene kai gondrel ka salwar chepa ta tinde je de hinto kalchewa yimbe cherna tene da khonchumbo ndabo jagarni chungwa yimba tene sanji je ka dan tumba yimbe cherna tangbo jagarki to tene peki to udong ta number je ba sinkin te ta jitang sei gen seni de yabarela tene de ji sun jambal genur churba la chon salo sinkin te lo chawa nam ji jarware tene lo chawa nam ji jarwa te kandire se na jitang sanji je kala dene number somsi yorela dene number som de kepa chutim je kor temba je ta tene te yendo ndodi ge kor je ta Tene tawa chor temba ngembe dene te hirap chor temba che de number some yebe na ne ta tanda gomba ta hirap tusom ki hirap ta ganjung ki hirap chor temba ngembe dene che konsuto ba yembe che nan jambali yendo churwala chon salo si jambali yona chon salo re.
And so I thought I would explain this text from the very beginning to the very end. It begins saying in Sanskrit, Madhyanta Vibhaga Karika, and in Tibetan, Udanta Namprachepe Tsiklurchepa, or in English, verses on differentiating the middle from the extremes. And so the reason for first presenting the title in Sanskrit is that this is a text that appeared in India. And so in India, there were the Buddha appeared in India, and then there were all his followers. There were the followers of the arhats of the listener vehicle. There were the great masters of the Mahayana, the six ornaments that beautify the world, and so forth. These all appeared in India, and so their words are also similar to the words of the Buddha. So there are those words that are the actual words of the Buddha, and there are those words that are not necessarily the words of the Buddha himself, but in terms of their meaning, they're very compatible with the words of the Buddha. These are the treatises that explain and clarify the words of the Buddha. And so these are all very important. And so in order to show how they're important and how they are similar to the words of the Buddha, we therefore also give the name in Sanskrit first. And then it's followed by the translation into Tibetan and English, which just shows the meaning of the name. Then following that, there is a prostration. And this prostration reads, I prostrate to the youthful Manjushri. Now, this was a prostration that was added by the Tibetan translators. And the reason for adding this prostration is there are three different categories of the Buddha's speech, the three different baskets. There is the basket that primarily teaches discipline and conduct. There is the basket of the sutras that primarily teaches samadhi. And there is the basket of the Abhidharma that primarily teaches the view and intelligence or wisdom. And so in the terms of that intelligence, this is the intelligence that comes out of listening and studying, as well as the intelligence that comes from meditation. And so these are what are primarily taught in the basket of Abhidharma. And so this, in terms of these three, is primarily teaching the intelligence, or the prajna in Sanskrit. And for that reason, there is a prostration. And so for that reason, it is included in the basket of Abhidharma, and there is a prostration to Manjushri.
Tene, Tejiso, Tatanda. Chitange young changeable ten on your la. The young changeable ten to the Latango, Liu on the Siena, Casio Siena, Tene, Leu, Na, your la. Tiniti, Tanda, Dom Tempe Capsula, number 10 on your Tiniti, Dom Tempe Capsula, Tango, Caritembaresena, Seni. Sunde Seni Tembare. Seni Sundu Tachitang Naranzo Senje Nelunda Wote Netsul to Nonsul Tandang Korwala Nepe Captain. The name Mahompala Tarbatopic Cap. The Neta Tene Korwala Nepe Capsula, the name Korwale Troll Group, Junsi, Time Nekap no one Turbata, Troll Gupa, Troll Tupa. Troll tupi Junsin Tempata, Tini Troll Sul Tempata. Tini non so young in the Pala tea, Tarbatop capsule candy yabata. Tarbatop ni, Tarbatop two grivis in a Tarbatop tupic captain. Tarbatop ni, Tini Devatopic Sulti, Tati and Seni about the Salvor Tempata. Tini Tatela Tarva Mutopatan, Korwalan, Tulde Pati, Zawate Canderesena, Tini Dom Nipati Dribare, 다 텔 parchi 생기지 요래 parchi 생긴 게 녀모 바도 남도로 라과 요래라 다 지당 그 나랑 수팅엔생 공게 요래데 팅엔생라 바르도 제바제 요래라 바르도 제바텔라 미살게 님본다고 때나 드니 드바티 빵구게 요래라 티처나 드바 칸데 예바 parchi 생긴 칸데 예바 템바 드니 dom니바데 드바 Tene dribati pongwar sipi ke tapti kandiri sena dom sumbati tekona nye rela tak chitang ke tene mantrulwa trulbati pongwar sipa la mantrulwa tene taper na nguma ke kepa tamchi chi tene tanda pe yope kapsala takpa tawala druldun trulna drulri somni jikra chege rela jikra chewa te kandiri sena trulbati yena yung trulbati pongbe ke tapti kandi gugri sena dul mahimba takwa yimba la hi goge yore ta junsin teacher na tekona ni nelu kan yimba te yaboje hi goge yabate tembate ta domsumba te tekona ni tini tekona ni te tanda ngaran sol yore te yinna ya te tini kandi sine gom goge yabate tembate nyembo gombe ke chul tembate ta tanda liu yen rabote liu yen rabote ten yore la liu yen rabote ten yore.
And so then following that, the first verse is like a summary of the text. Now, in terms of the number of chapters in the text, there are 5 different chapters. But in terms of the summary, there are actually 7 things in the summary. So what are these 7 things that appear in the summary? The first of these is the characteristics. So it says the characteristics. Now, when we are looking at the nature of our mind, we realize that there is the nature of how the mind is, and then there is the way things appear. And so we have the characteristics of how we are in samsara now, and then how in the future we can be in nirvana. And so that is the way things are, that is the characteristics. And so we need to understand why it is that we need to free ourselves from samsara. We need to realize what the nature of the confused, the temporary confused appearances we see are. And we need to realize that we need to free ourselves from them. We also need to realize that we can free ourselves from them. We need to know that we are able to do this, and we need to do the method. We need to know the methods to be able to do this. And then once we free ourselves from those, we have liberation. Now, is liberation something that we can actually achieve for ourselves? Yes, it is something. We need to know what that something that we can achieve is. We need to know the characteristics of that as well. When we attain liberation, what is the happiness that we attain? What are the characteristics of that happiness? And so in this way we have the confusion of not being able to free ourselves and then being able to free ourselves from that. And so we need to know what is it that also prevents ourselves from attaining that liberation. And so these are the obscurations. So the obscurations, these are the things that prevent us from freeing ourselves. They are all the afflictions. They are all the coarse conceptualizations and thoughts we have. Now, generally, we need to free ourselves by practicing meditation. But there are things that prevent us from actually practicing meditation. And so we need to understand what the antidotes for those are so that we can eliminate those problems. Now, and then if we do that, then we will be able to, and so for that reason we need to know what the obstacles and the problems are. And so that is why they are taught. And so then we need to know, well, what is the method that we can free ourselves from these? Well, the method is the next, it is suchness. So suchness here, this means being unconfused. And so in order to eliminate confusion, we need to meditate upon unconfusion. And so if we meditate upon on the unconfused, then on suchness, then we can attain liberation. This is something that all the great masters have said. It's like when you mistake a speckled rope for being a snake. At first you get afraid. You think, this is a snake, and you're afraid. That is confusion. Now the method to eliminate that confusion is to know that that is not a snake, that is a rope. And if you know that that is a rope, then you will no longer be fearful. And so in this way, if we understand the way that that suchness is, we need to understand the way that suchness is. And so this is the third topic, or on suchness. And then that we need to realize that suchness is something that we have. And then following that, there comes the section on meditating on the antidotes. And so these are the first 4 chapters.
Tene tatinane leu yibatela desin som yorela. Desin som yebenane desin tangbote tat jitang tingenzen gombe chul. Detan tingenzen gomne tati netan sena tati tat gomne devundabo. Tene kande tombo chorwa kande jigeba. Tene nyomnyong kande jigeba. Tene topa kande jigeba ta tenzuge ta chitang sadang lamje netang rabo tembatang. Tene tartu kandebu. Tene sumba ten tartu kandebu kande jitoge yeba tembate. Nombasom yore la. Tene te jeso leu ngabate. Tanda tiba chimbo, tinani mixalga tiba chimbo la tumo maimbe chechu kande yabate tembate. Ta yongde nando zo kanten yuare sena tanda tensen namba dain de leu ngaga nando dune ten yuare.
Now the 4th chapter has 3 parts. And so the first of these parts is basically the methods of our meditation. And then while we meditate upon the methods of the meditating upon the antidotes, when we meditate upon those, then what are the phases of our meditation? So when we do meditation, what are the results that come from it? When we meditate, what is the feeling that we have? What are the experiences that we have? What is the realization that has? And so in this way we progress. It talks about how we progress through the paths and the levels. It talks about the nature of that progress. Then the third part of the 4th chapter is achieving results. And so when we meditate, how do we attain the ultimate result of our practice? And so those are the 3 parts of the 4th chapter. Then in the 5th chapter, we have the teaching on the particular teaching on the Mahayana, the special features of the Mahayana path, because we are primarily teaching that path. And so for that reason, we have these 7 different points that are contained within 5 different chapters.
Tene ta teji so ta tenzo tensin namba dain te da leu nga te tarba yindol hedu tambo seni de sumrela seni sedu ta chitang korwala seni kande yore tarbala seni kande yore tene te netang rabo te chasan yaboje he chitang korwa de la tene trubno kyage yore Trubin Nova Tela Tene, Sorwa Kandi Yungiore, Sena, Tene Kapkala, Dunalta, Jengi, Don Parchi Yungior. Tepanya Yore Besena, Tepanya Yore, Tekande Sena, Tintrubari. Tintruba in Bechana, Nelu de Hena, Tepang Togior. Tepang Gugior, Tepang Gugior Besena, Tepang Gugior. Tepang Togior Besena, Tepang Togior, La. Te yendo nonzun yangin de bata tarbate korwa te pangna tarbato giore tarbato pati tini nesul hiware tarbate top gugi yore besina tarbate top gugi yore tarbate top tugi yore besina tarbate top tugi yore junsen kari resena tarbate ta seni tichitang ta senji nelu gatainla yore la ta tanda te 단다 용디가 온드시나 지당가 군도 용 용주 넘버 섬지 콘스 두니 때나 요아래라 군도 시나 당아란 속에 인트롤니 망보지 요 드니 때라 초인 침보지 드니 때라 때니 쟁이도 파르치 망보 용기 요아래라 된조 단단랑 운이 요아래베시나 요마래 teni tati nuwa zomgi yuwari la nuwa zomdi tang kunto ti ni tenla chupa yuwari besi na yuwamari nuwa zomdi kandiri si na yinwang tak jitanga jiwa ngame lela teni nuwa dhamanda xerwa tila yinwang sungi yuwari teni ti yinwang ti tang kunto tang yinwang ni ti panya yuwari besi na panya yuwari ti nguwa ti rangingi tongba tati la yungzhuk shugi yuwari la 다 테라 진 junsen country sena yongda mayin kuntu ye tela nipo ye mayin yongda mayin be kuntu toba ta tanda chitang koru chunong de yewang number hiba sena yongda ba mayin be ta ngaran so che koru chunong chari gen dabo che la nikuntu che charge yore be sena charge yore Tela charge yore de inaya tela tanda kandi charge yore sena chejungi yul che yulji nambala yo sambata nansenji nambala yo sambatende charge yore de inaya tela nibo ye mai zunzi nibo de yo mare zunzi nibo de kuntare teni ona ta ti yonda mai bikum to topa tela kandi yore sena tomba ni nandala yo se tela tomba ni de nelu ti ngorang hingi tomba re Tati chitanga tawi tusong tena papa kausala tati ndi sunga yuwarela tini ngaransu gambi nyonsu nyonga kausala tini senji ngola tawi kausala senji ngola ti tanda kandi xargi yuware sena ngaransu chunung namba na tsuba xargi yuware ti yewang re yewang tardu yewang nuwa tardu dembar chuba yuware we sena dembar chuba yuwa mare tela kunta yuwa mare tini senji nelu ti kandi chiri sena tini ti nguni ge niya tang tonya mebe ngorang hingi tomba ni imbe serna tomba ni nandala ye tela yona te ye tomba ni re te yina ya tela noa te xarge yuare zunzi ni ge noa te xarge yuare
And so then following that, there are the 7 sections and the 5 different chapters are then all taught one in sequence. And so the first of these is about the characteristics. And so when we say characteristics, what do we mean by saying characteristics? Well, there are the characteristics of samsara. There are the characteristics of liberation. And so we need to understand really clearly what the way they are is. Now, generally, when we think about samsara, it is confused appearances. And so what happens? What feelings come out of these experiences, come out of these confused experiences? Well, we have many experiences of pain and suffering. We have experiences of difficulties, problems. And so are we able to actually eliminate these difficulties and these problems? We can. We can eliminate them. And the reason we can eliminate them is that they are a confusion. They're just confused appearances of samsara. And so if we know what the actual nature of samsara is, then we will be able to eliminate them. So do we actually need to eliminate them? Are they something that we are able to eliminate? Is it something that we really need to try to do? It is. We can eliminate them. We are able to eliminate the confused appearances. We can do it. And when we do that, then what we have is the liberation of nirvana. So if you eliminate samsara, then you have liberation. And the nature of that liberation is peace. And is that something that we need to attain? It is something that we need to attain. Is it something that we're able to attain? We can attain it. And so the reason is that if we understand the characteristics of that liberation, then we can see that actually there's something that is just present. It's the nature of mind that is present within ourselves. And so in terms of how it is described in this particular text, In this particular text, it's described in terms of the three characteristics. And these three characteristics are the imaginary, the dependent, and the wholly established. So the imaginary, the dependent, and the wholly established are these three characteristics. Now, the imaginary is all of the confused appearances that we have. There are all these appearances that occur, and we are confused about them, and we think that they're really truly there. And then we get attached to them. And because we are attached to them, they make obstacles for ourselves. And so these are the imaginary. But are they actually true? Are they actually real as they appear? They are not. They're just appearances. They're just mere appearances. And so when we look at those mere appearances, that is what we call the dependent nature. And so there are all the appearances of the imaginary, and actually that just mere appearance is the dependent. And so that appears because of our births and the karma that causes our birth and so forth. And so that mere appearance is the dependent. Now, are these something, the imaginary and the dependent, are these something that we can abandon and eliminate? They are something. And when the reason is that the nature of them is emptiness. And so the nature is that emptiness nature is what we call the wholly established. And so in this way, the imaginary and the dependent are both emptiness. And so there are all these confused appearances that do occur. And as it says here in verse 2, it says, there is misconception. The two do not exist in that. Emptiness exists in this, it also exists in those. And so here, there is misconception. So we do have the imaginary. We do have the appearances of the dependent that appear, and and these are the basis that appear. So this is the basis of all our appearances. This is the misconception. The two do not exist in it. When we look at it, then how is it that these things appear? When things appear to us, then there appears to be an object on the outside that is perceived, and then there appears to be the perceiver in the middle. So we have the dualistic appearance of the perceiver and the perceived. And these two, the perceiver and perceived, do not exist in that. In actuality, they do not actually exist. But they do continue appear. And so, what is it that is this that this basis, this misconception is like? Well, it is emptiness. Emptiness exists in this misconception. There is emptiness, because the nature of it is emptiness. And so when we look at that and we meditate upon it, we first understand it through listening and comprehension, and then we meditate upon this. And so in order to meditate upon this, we actually look at the essence of our mind. And when we look at the nature of our mind, we see that naturally there are the appearances that appear. There are the confused appearances that happen, the confused appearances. Those confused appearances themselves are the dependent. Then what is and are these actually truly existent? They are not. So these confused appearances are not truly existent. The imaginary does not exist either. And so within the nature of the mind is empty of those. And so in this way, the mind is empty of those confused appearances. So it is, but that nature of the mind is empty. But at the same time, even though the appearances are not actually true, they do continue to appear. So it also exists in that. So the appearances do continue to arise.
Yepi mepi yepi na tena omelamye no sunditela. Tati tomba mai sedu tene yonda mai bekundu topa te tonga tandanga raso sharki yorela. Teacher na jiyo mepa che rebesina tomba jiyo mepe tomba ni je rebesina tomba ni mare. Tati la muton mai sino wana te tardo demba tene chizungi yul nonzimbe sem tenzo ta ngaransul nonsul kandiri sina tse yulje nambache da nansenje nambache tela chizungi yul da nanzimbe sem segi yorela te tabuge sem don yul te ni uni dembar truba tene tsa ngubo dembar yorebe sina yo mare mutonga mainde ti ngo de tombare Teta vena tamchi hi ta junsin teta bugicirna nelu ngoma demba kandiri sena tetardo tomba tombo nonsulgi ondo sena truba yeba nesulgi ondo sena kaya madupa teta tamchi hi yebi mebi yebi na yebi sedu tene ta tanda chen yongda mayin bikundo topati yore ngaranzu tutnu te khargi yore de tana mebi na tana truba mebi na tana truba yo marela te tardo tene tana truba mepa te yina ya tene nekab tomba yen yendula ya no khargi yore bisina khargi yore yebi na tene omelong yino ta te tabu ge netan te zawa ta ngaranso senji ngola tena te tardo tene tomba mayimba mutonga mayimba tene ta tanda yeba tang meba ninjin talin deba tetabu je nyongi yore la ta tetabu nelungo onto sidi tembare.
And so what is the characteristic of this? Well, it is explained in the third verse. Not empty, yet not empty. Therefore, everything is explained. From existing, not existing, and existing, that is the middle way. And so when we say it's not empty, that means that there are the misconceptions. The misconceptions do appear. The appearances do occur. But with these appearances occurring, are they just emptiness that is complete nothingness? They are not. So that in that way, they're not emptiness. Yet, but when we say yet not empty, so they appear and they occur, but are they actually true as they appear? They are not. When we think about it, there is the perceiver and the perceived. There is the external object that we perceive, that is perceived. There is the internal perceiver. And so we talk about the perceived and the perceiver in this way. And are these external perceived object and the internal perceiving mind, are they true in that way? Are they real? They are not. And so in this way, they are not empty. The essence of these is also empty. And so for that reason, everything is explained. They are not empty and yet not empty. And so this is the actual way that the nature is. And so this is how everything is empty. But in terms of how everything appears, there are the confused appearances. They do occur. But in terms of the way they actually are, then they cannot be truly established as anything. And so then it continues from existing, not existing, and existing. And so from existing, so there are the confused appearances. The misconception does occur. It is present. And so it's existing. But it is not it's not real as it seems to be. It cannot be established as it seems to be. And so it's not existing. Yet, at the same time as it is emptiness, it continues to appear, and so and existing. So this is the middle way. And so when we look at the root of at the basis for what this, at the real nature of what it is, when we look at the essence of our mind, we can see that the essence of our mind is that it's not empty, and yet it's also not empty. It transcends any conception of either existing or not existing. And that is something that we can experience. And so that is the nature of how they are.
Tene tate tanda ngaranso nesuji onto sete tembarela. Tate jesu nonsuji onto sete tembatela. Tene tandon senjin dot namri no number hiba na rabdo jeo te teme temi pena teon me sunditela. Ta chi yulje nambala hargi yore tandan sedu ta tanda che zu da terror rezi nambala ngaranso no hargi yore. Tene nan semchinje number la charge yore. Nan semchinje number charge de la make number hiba, to nawe number hiba. Ta make number hibi, zon, nawe number hibi. Tene datu, nae number hibi, tetsoro la soba. Tene ta semchinje number la charge yore. Te yendo da sedu, ta tanda da tanzamba. Nyemombe ye sungi yore la yeni ta ngaran su da meba la da yo sambata ta tinde je no charge yore da ta ti ge tsawa te nomri te kinji number hibate kinji number hibata salcha zongi ngaran su no ate chitang number hibatsu je sundu te la kinji number hibate make number hibato nawe number hibate zo ngu sen laburi Rete inaya, kunji number hibat ngusen kali kapo, dati rete inaya, salcha zonki, chosu manu, wati takwa yorela, tela kunji number hibat sungi yorela, teta no number hibat na, rabdo jewo, tati chi yurji number la hyage yore, non senjinga number la hyage yore, dog number la hyage yore, te rabdo jewo, te teme, tene te me pena te me ta te no de charge yore te inaya te tardo trupa yo mare so
And so that is teaching the actual nature of how things are. And following that, there is an explanation of how things appear. And so this is the fourth verse, which reads, "The consciousness that appears as objects being self and awareness occurs, but its object does not exist. Since those do not exist, it does not exist either." And so when the consciousness appears, it appears in the form of, there's the aspect of the external object. And so that is the objects. And so these are the forms that the eyes see, the sounds that the ears hear, and so forth. Then it also appears as beings. So beings here means sentient beings, and that means the sensory faculties of like the eye that sees a form. So you have the eye consciousness that arises, or you have the ear hearing a sound, so that produces an ear consciousness, and the nose will smell a scent, and therefore you have the nose consciousness that arises. And so these are these consciousnesses, that here are called the sentient beings. And then there is and so these all occur as sort of aspects of how our mind appears. Then it says the self, it appears as the self. So the self here means that we cling to the self. This is what we call the afflicted mind that's always present. So even though there isn't really any true self, we have this thought, there is a self. That thought does occur. And so the root of all of this is the consciousness that appears. The root of all this is the awareness. And when you talk about the awareness at the end of the second line of this verse, the word awareness here means the ground consciousness. And so the ground consciousness is just merely the clear knowing aspect of the mind. So we talk about this. We talk about the all-ground or all-aya consciousness. And when we think about this in terms of the 8 consciousnesses, there are the 5 sensory consciousnesses that are very easy to identify. It's easy to say, okay, this is the eye consciousness, this is the ear consciousness, this is the nose consciousnesses. Those are easy to find. But when you start talking about the 8th consciousness, then it gets a little bit more difficult to actually find it and to identify it. But actually, the 8th consciousness is just the mere knowing quality of the mind that never sort of falls off in any direction. It's just this this continually present clarity of the mind. That is what we call the ground consciousness. And so there's the consciousness that appears in these different ways as either the objects being self or awareness. And so it appears in the form of external objects. It appears in the form of the perceiving mind or the sentient being. It appears to be a self or as awareness. It appears in all of these ways. So it occurs. But its object does not exist. Since those do not exist, it does not exist either. And so the appearances do occur, but they cannot be established as they appear.
Tene ta teacher na yonda main kuntopa tene teacher tupa yin yonda main be kuntopa de ta tene je sine tugi yore nguni tugi yore den trubati yo mare sine la ya yo mare trubati no harge yore de yin yo te tar to tupa yo mare la yunsin teacher na yonda main kuntopa tene teacher tupa yin ta yo sine keling gubanda ji la yin ya Tejin main yonda main bekun to bati korang ngo nangin ti demba yore besena yo mare la yonda main bekun to bati zawani yo mare sene yo mare yimi men se du zawani me ba yo mare la te tabu ge netang ji yore te tabu ge netang te tabu ge yonda main bekun to bati se na tene teji nene trolwande tati si ne tene troldo kore tati yongda mayin bekun to topati ki netang te yapochi hi yongda mayin bekun to topati ki netang te nyamnyong ke topa chepar chinchi che na tene korwe ki chunhong dele troldo kwe yore.
And so for that reason, it continues in verse 5, misconception is for that reason established. It is not like that. It is not primordially nothing. When that is exhausted, it is held to be liberation. And so misconception is for that reason established. And so that is how we can establish the misconception. There is the confusion. There are the confused appearances. They're present. You can't say that they're just completely nothing. You can't say that they don't happen. So in that way, it is established. But they aren't actually. They can't actually. So in this way, you can say that there is misconception. It actually is there. Misconception is for that reason established. And so you have to accept and you have to posit that there is confusion. You have to say that confusion is there. But when you say that confusion is there, is it really as it appears? It is not like that. And so it appears to us to be true and real, but is it real in the same way that it appears? It is not. And so in that way, there is the misconception. And yet the misconception is not primordially nothing. It's not like this misconception is nothingness, blankness, nothing at all. And so this is how the nature of this is. And so when that is exhausted, it's held to be liberation. So when we realize, when that is exhausted, when the misconception is exhausted, we are liberated. So when we understand what the nature of misconception is, we see what that nature is, we understand fully what that nature is, then we will be freed from the confused appearances of samsara.
Tā tēlā, tē tāpū kē nēlū kē yīmbē chēr nā, tā tēlā njūpū kē tsūr tē kāntē jirē sē nā, tā pā tōng nē yōng, tā chē tāng kē kuntā yōng rūp sōp yō rē lā. Tā pā tāng nē sē tū, tā tēlā mē yēn tō trūpē nōwa chē khār kē yō rē. Tēne tēn trūpē nōwa tē khār wā tē kāna tēne yōng kē yō rē sē nā, yēwāng kē nāmbar khē pā lā tēne tā, kiwa ngamala le sopa la tene noa te khargi yuare te yina yung tena trupa yuwa mare la te trupa mepa te yungsu trupa ni chungo yung rup ki tena togi yuare la ten tseri yungda mendo tseri ta ti ge tene te yewaan ta kunta te tena madrupa yinpe cherna yungda ma yinpe topa te re la tene nipo me pechera yongda mayin pe kundu topa yin pe junsin te che zungwe yordong non zembe sen kundu topa tong yong nambar kiba te me pechera na kabndar kiba yin.
And so how is it that we can actually sort of engage this nature? Well, the way we can do this is through understanding the meaning of the three natures. So in verse 6, it says, there are the imaginary, dependent, and the wholly established. And so the imaginary is all of the confused appearances that occur even though they don't exist. But where do these appearances come from? They come out of dependence. They come in dependence upon all of the actions from our previous life and our births and so forth. And yet these do not really exist as they appear. They actually are emptiness, and that emptiness is the wholly established. And so in this way, they are explained from objects, misconception, and neither existent. And so there are the dependent and the imaginary are they're the appearances of the objects, but they are misconception. They are not true conception of how things are. So they are misconception, and so in this way they are not, neither of these truly exist. And so in this way, the imaginary and the dependent do not truly exist.
Tene ta te la te tabu ta chitang chulbe ge no kunda ta tin chulbe ge ye de yang ta tin chulba te tar do madrup yongrup te number som te la kandisi ni nyamsel ne gu gre se na tombo mikpala ta tangbo je kunda ti ngo la ta ne mikpala ne tene so me mikpala rap tu je ta te rangin ji madrup tomba ni ji chorwa te yongre te tabu me mikpa te chi zung ge yol madrup la tene non zembe sen madrup la tene thamchi tongni yimba me mikpala tene so me mikpala rap tu je tene me mikpa te ta tanda chu thamchi rangin ki madrup te jegi yore la ta ti tangaran so no te chargi yore no te charwa tardo madrupa nguni nang sen la ta ka sala tini sente rangi madrupa la tong yore se ta ti ji la shaloka dambati ti cherna mikpa ne memingo ni to tini ti tanda no ti tanda ga nelu de kandire sena ti o madrupa rangi ki tugi yorella teta vena mikpa to meming nyambar hi prasa ta tanda no anda ta tini no te tar to rangi ki madrupa ni bote tini nyom do yapa tini ti no yendolo ngo tomba yimba ta ton yendolo ngo na nongi yopa te tar to hi prasa te meming nyambar hi prasa.
And so we have the confused appearances that are the imaginary. We have the basis of their appearance, which is the dependent. And then we also have the inability to establish them, which is the wholly established. We have these three. So how is it that we actually engage these in the practice? Well, it is first by actually using them as a reference, based upon a reference. And so we use the appearances of the confused appearances as a reference in our meditation. We look at the essence of the imaginary. And when we look at the essence of the imaginary, we can sort of feel that it is not, that it does not truly exist. And so based on the reference, the non-referential occurs. And so we look at the external object, we use that as a reference, and we see that there is nothing that we can use as a reference point. We see that the object cannot be established as anything. And so that is the we see that the object cannot be established as anything. And so that is the non-reference. And so based upon that non-reference, the non-referential occurs. We also see that the mind that perceives it cannot be established as anything. And so in this way, everything is emptiness. And so the non-referential occurs, or we know that all phenomena are naturally emptiness. And so there are all the appearances that occur, but at the same time as they occur, they cannot be truly established as existing the way they appear. And so when we look at the nature of the mind, when we look at the nature of the mind, we see that it is not, we can see that it cannot be truly established as anything. And so this is what is described in the 7th verse. And then in the 8th verse, it says, for that reason, the reference is established as non-reference in essence. And so when we have the we have the appearances, and then we have the actual nature of them. And we look at the actual nature of appearances, we see that they cannot be established as anything. And so therefore know that the referential and the non-referential are the same. And so in this way we can know that the appearances and their nature that cannot be established as anything occur together. And so at the same time as something occurs, as an appearance occurs, it is empty. And at the same time as it is empty, it also occurs. And so that is the nature of how we should know that the referential and the non-referential are the same.
다 대지에서 사지가 온듯이나 강기 녀모 버세바통 지다르 녀모 버세바니 니요레라 강기 녀모 버세바데 다 조응하란 조금 주능라 때네 용기 요레라 아 되네 다티 용다 많이 베건도 또 버생기데 간디젤 요레시 텔라티 시 이와시나 아 니 셈동 셈중이 요레 셈 생긴데 쫀다보지 셈중 생긴데 넘도 그소한다보지 셈 생긴데 살차 정게라 거기 요래 셈중 생긴데 가도 이제 라소베게 초로와 만다와 중화텔라 셈중 세기 요래 다티기 센동 셈중 텔라 때니 컨송 코르완데 trugi yoarela tati konsong korwande ge noande charge yoarela noande charge ge cherna tati sem tela kande ji yoare sena tela tenton number hi ngaran chu noande charwati tanda chezo da de ro rizala soba ton number hi batela sem se ge yoare tela yapondo dupondo tela chogindo tela gagamendo sambandra choro namtu mandrawa chepraji mambo chungi yoarela de chepar semle song setati de cheparte semle songare son tati ge tanda Teta, Tati, Jima Tela Candidacy, take the change number he, Tati, number he patella ya, Tene, Tata, number he but 2G or number he but 2G and on the takeness, you can number he patella, change number he bound, Joy number he patakanga, John Raboji, Nibati, number he but 2 dine URL, number he but 2 dine de. Tate make number hiba, nave number hiba, nine number hiba, J number hiba, Luigi number hiba, the ngata, Titan to each number hiba, the true, Titan to Dottons and big, Niemombe, the dine day, Tanyam to Zini, Nipa, Niorchepa, Tati, King number hiba, Pocha Yapa, Tig, Moatil, Long Chepa in the channel, Pocha Yapa la, Niorchepa Re. Tene nyewar che tong yong che tong se ta te semjung go on de sena senjung la chitang ke senjung mangbo ye ya yore tangem be dene ke na senjung a chita chi la so ba ye ya yore te kap ndar tene choro atang duhi ni duhi ta duji namba som de ya bare la tene choro atela ta te sem ti ge long che pe kap la Tati yapondo, dupondo, sombege, nyewar chepa, nyewar long chepa ti yungarel. Tela chorwa segre. Tati yendo te yonsu che ne, tati yapondo, kado re, ta yeb re, namba re, somne, zimba tela yonsu chepa tela duhi sege yorela. Tene te injuzi semle so ta tela njupar chepa, duji ke number hipa mambo yung, duji ke namtu mambo yung yorela. Te tabu ke chorwa ta chay duhi ta ni duji tong somte semle shung re ta te tabu ke sem tong sem shung ke chebar te china
de la chora de la casa yadu zhao
yadu chorwa de nyom
zhao
dedu
ki chora dedu zhao lasa. Then the next main topic is explaining how we become afflicted. And so this is explaining, first of all, what it is that makes us afflicted and how we are afflicted in terms of the topics. And so we have the basic, we have all the confused appearances, and there is the basis of these confused appearances that is misconception. But how is it that misconception occurs? Well, if we look at it, there are two different aspects to it. Misconception is the mind and mental factors of the three realms. And so we have the mind and the mental factors. Now, mind is what we call the primary mind. It's basic, and then we also have the thoughts, and those are the mental factors. So the mind, that is just basically, the primary mind is just the clear knowing aspect. And then the mental factors are all the thoughts we have that think this is nice, this is happy, this is sad, this is fearful, this is problematic, this is difficult. Those are all mental factors. And so it is because of the mind and the mental factors that all of the confusion of the three realms of samsara occurs. It's because of them that all of the appearances of the three realms of samsara occur. So, well, what is it that we actually mean when we say mind and mental factors? So it says, seeing an object is consciousness. So here, consciousness means mind. And so when we just see or merely perceive an object, that is the mind. And so this is not thinking this is good, this is bad, or clinging to it in any way. When we think this is good or bad or cling to it in any way, those are seeing its features, and those are mental factors. And so that sort of thought, that is the distinction here between mental factors. They're seeing the features of the object and thinking about it as being good, bad, or clinging to it, and so forth. And so then that describes it, but then there are also other ways to sort of classify the mind and mental factors. And so if we think about the mind, we talk about it as the 8 consciousnesses. And it says here, the first is the conditional consciousness. And so of all the different consciousnesses we have, we say that we have 8 consciousnesses. And among all of these 8 consciousnesses, the first of these is the ground consciousness. And this is called the conditional consciousness or the causal consciousness, because it's sort of the ground or the condition from which all of the appearances occur. And so that is the 8th consciousness. The first is conditional consciousness. Consciousness refers to the 8th consciousness, the ground consciousness. Then the second line reads, the second is what experiences. And so the second here refers to all of the other 7 consciousnesses grouped together. So the eye consciousness, the ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and these are the 5 sensory consciousnesses. Then in addition to those, there is the mental consciousness. And then, in addition to that, there is the 7th consciousness, the afflicted mind that is clinging to a sense of self. And so these all grouped together are what we call here the second. And so these are what experience the object. So the second is what experiences. There are all the appearances that arise because of the imprints within our ground consciousness. And the consciousnesses that experience them are all those other consciousnesses. And so that is the first 2 lines. Then there are the mental factors. And there are many different ways to classify mental factors. In the Abhidharma, it talks about the 51 different mental factors. But here, to make it easy, we have just sort of 3 groups. We have feeling, we have conception, and we have formation. And so feeling is just merely experiencing the object. You have the experience, as before, the consciousnesses experience the object, and then there's a feeling of it being pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. And so that is feeling. And then when you look at that feeling and then you say, oh, this is really good, or this is terrible, this is bad, this is the shape, this is the color, that all is conception. And then there are different ways that you can engage those conceptions, and those are all of the other mental factors that are grouped together as what we call formations. And so in this way we have the feeling, the mere sensation of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. We have the conception, which is about thinking about things as their shape, their color, and so forth. And then we have all of the other thoughts, which are the formations. And all of these are together are the mental factors. And so this is the distinction between the mind and the mental factors.
Tene ta te jiso ta te tabu no la tene 다치당 코르위긴 세니라보데 덴드리엔라 주니게 고니 템바레라 덴드리엔라 주니데 다 당보 마릭바 다디게 샘제 네루 세나요 롱 단다 주니게 네루 세나요 롱데 데 단다 마토바레 대체다와긴도 마토레 단다 바도 마토바레 대 마토바데 수지인지 종아레세나 마리팔라테니 종아레라 마리파이게 드립체나 드니 주니지 네루데 마토바레 주니지 네루 마토바 마리파 텔라테네 칸데 용게 요레세나 드립체도 데페체르데 드니 티게 사벤라보데 따게 요레 사벤라보데 두지 텐드 주니게 노니 니바든 두지 세그레라 두지제 텐드 텔라테네 레소테 다 사벤라보데 데게 요레 사벤라보티 센노히지텐도 타파인 베처나 데니텐드 주니가 나네 숨바티 남히레라 남히티게 데닝하랑 레카나 데브뇽구고 나타나 트피체드나 트게요아레 대타이네 노히 데니 민수 다티 텐드 주니가 나네 텐드 주니가 나네 이바티 민수레라 민수가 온 겐자인데 다티게 루지 렌드로요아레 겐자인 데니 젠치 도 다티 텐드 주니가 나네 나바티 젠치 도레라 젠치 도 되게 다 루용소 조바 루용 타페나 마이 ngaldo chini luyonso zobanda보 용게 요래 luyonso 조네 텐드 주니가 노네 두파테 칸데레세나 테네 렉바레라 테네 렉바티 체 열진 넘발란 통 다티 텐드 주니 콜로 따르동 코리용 임베체나 somje che yol nang number hiba wangbote yongshi somje njurwa yongsu chebare 다 데이터 리발라테네 칸데 용게 요아레세나 니월 롱제바데 초르와 용게 요아레라 초르와 용하제다 데니 초르와 라테네 드바테 다텔라 초르와테 라만다체 초르니 데니 초르와 데와라 차히 초르와 둥할란 도르데 로테 데시단 지시 세바 용게 요아레 텐드 주니가 나네 제바테 세바가 드피처탄스 다디게 디파 소로와 찐치 트릭바 소로와 세파 렘바 세파 소로와 세파 테네 세파 테네 디게 구바티 렘바레라 렘비게 다디게 단다 소로와 세파다 세파 렘바치니 조르와 세파다 테네 다디 쭈바티 응은두체도 스파레라 테네 디게야 제와치마 양저도 코르왈랑 코르위게 저도 스반중이 요아레 쭈바티 테네 쭈지바 제와다 쭈니바 가히 다디 제와다 가히니 보티 뇽다 테네 둥할처나 로아센지 동지 녜모발라 둥할지노발라 줄게 요아레 다투 둥할지노발라 줄게 요아레 다틴 타르투 둥할진 넘발라 주로와인 베처나 다텐드 주니데 칸디제레세나 넘바 솜데 녜모바레 넘바 니데 레레 넘바 다인데 다 둥할지 예다인 숭기요아레라 넘바 솜 세두 마리파탄 초르와 세파탄 렘바니 솜데 마리셀리 솜 녜모 테니 넘바 니디 두지 동 스파니디 다치와 하마게 레다 치와 치마게 레라 거기 요레라 테니 넘바 다인데 다테 마임베 다인데 다 코란 텐드리가 온게 렘지 동할지 넘발레 혀와 임베처나 테니 넘데 용다 마임베 토발리 종아레 다테 타부 가니 종아레센 용다 마임베 컴도 토발라 테니 종아레
And so when all of these appear, the sort of support for how they appear in samsara are the 12 links of interdependence. And so this is here in the verses how they are afflicted, on starting with verse 11. And so the first of the links of interdependence is ignorance. And so ignorance means whether we call it the nature of the mind or whether we call it the Dharma nature, the nature of all phenomena, it's not realizing what it is. We haven't realized the nature of reality up to now. And why is that? Whose fault is that? Well, it becomes because of ignorance. It's because of ignorance we have been obscured. So it's the first word, from obscuring. So because of the obscuring, we have not realized the nature. And then because we are obscured, what happens is that we plant the seeds of our next existence. That means that is the link, the second link, the link of formation. So formation means doing the actions that then plant the seeds for a further existence. And then once we've planted those seeds, well, what does that happen? Where do we plant them? Well, we plant them in the consciousness. And so that is the third link, consciousness. And so when we perform an action, then there's the result that comes, and that is experienced, or that comes together in our consciousness. And so this is like the consciousness of at the time of taking birth. And so of this link of consciousness is the third of the links of interdependence. And then then after that, then there's the link of name and form. And so name and form is like seizing a body. It's like really taking a body. So you've got the consciousness that comes, and then you really are just sort of taking control of a body, and that's or seizing the body. And so that is the link of name and form. Then following that is the fifth link is the link of the six sense spaces, and this is this is completing. So it's completing the body. It's like when you've got a fetus in the mother's womb, then it's like finishing out all the different senses and parts of the body. So that is completing the sixth length of the fifth link of the six sense bases. Then there is the link of contact. So contact, this is when we see an external form or experience an external object. And so this is determining the three. And the three are the external object that we see, the internal mind that perceives, and then the sensory faculty that is the basis for the three, the internal sense base. And so these determining the three, that is the sixth sense, the sixth, that is contact. And then what happens because of that? Well, we experience something. So that experience is the next link, which is feeling. And then, because of the feeling, we have the next word is binding. So when we experience something that is pleasant, then we develop the attachment to it that wants it. Or we experience something unpleasant, we want to get rid of it. And so in this way, it's binding to that. And so that is the link of craving. And then following that craving, there is the link of, there is joining here, which joining here means the link of grasping. So this is actually this is actually the feeling of actually trying to get something, the link of grasping. Then following that, there is the 10th, which is link. The 10th link is the link of becoming. And so this link of becoming is when we actually do something that actualizes our next birth. And so that is the link of actualizing or becoming. Then the 11th and the 12th links of interdependence are the birth and then aging and death. And so these are grouped together as suffering. So when these are the different sufferings that we experience as sentient beings. And so in this way, these are the 12 links of interdependence that go in this way. So these are the 12 links of interdependence. And as a side note, if you had trouble taking notes here, there is a cheat sheet in the back that has a list of these all. Take a look in the back of your packet. There is this nice little cheat sheet with all 12 links there. And so And so in this way, there are these 12 different links of interdependence, and they can be described in 3 parts. And so the 3 and 2 as well, afflicted, 7 for misconception. And so there are the 3 of these are afflictions. These 3 that are afflictions are the first one, ignorance, then also craving and grasping. So ignorance, craving, and grasping are the afflictions. Then there are 2 that are karma. So the 2 that are karma are formations and becoming. So these are like the karma or our actions in previous and later lives. And then the other 7 of these are the bases for the experience of suffering. So these are the name and form and so forth. These are the bases for experience of suffering. And so these all appear in a cycle or an order. And so what do these all come from? They all come out of misconception. So they all arise because of misconception.
다 텔라 레오 동반세니 그 레오 텔라 코르긴 세니 다 데네 타르긴 세니 넘바니 땡요레라 디나네 단 코르긴 세니 데 유튜버레라 데네 드링 하두차라 춘틴 테좀 쇼나 데네 지탕게 다단다 착보다고 요레 데 이나야 텔라 쩐주야보 나나 데네 된다 사보다 된도발 또 투바 다 딘데 용기 요래라 딘데야 지당가 땡주라 손지 좀 딘데지 숨부가 까데 다 지당가 초 돌자 로마탐지가 고라웨게 쩌도 땡주 sardo zom nang kapsula tenju la chepar yorela tenju de samon jinbe tenju se ta samon tenju sur ya ten ya banda bo je da kashi tene jashin de tenju se jachin bo tenju sur du ya be tenju ta sanji ji jom den de jin do tenju silbur song ya ba te tene salbur ten ya ba yin be cherna kapnder 다 자신 드프텐 주스 자침보 텐주 surdu yaba imbecherna 대지 타보다고 요래데 이나야 다 데라 가리고 그랬으나 투피 히랍 제베가슬라요 전주 정국에 여바제다 데니 sombi 히랍 제베가슬라요 전주 정국에 여바제다 데니 gombi 히랍 제베가슬라요 전주 정국에 임베cher나 전주 야보 나네 데니 제다 히사마레 sombe popa humba maimba 데니 베 popa지네 히토그리 가리리세나 다단다 나란소 지루 다니 이벨레로시 요아레라 지루 다니 이벨레로시나 당나란 히투그마리 sombe popa 형그레데 이나야 히메도 바카요 요마레 다페나 노마게 툭툭 체퍼진다 벤데다 체퍼진 텐조야 당부 수수지오 타말바 임발라 드닌 다르투 근데부 톱투기 요아레라 나란소야 전주정나 톱마도 바 용게 요마레라 티처나 셈포파지 전주정 나로 지효인.
So in the first chapter, there are the 2 parts. There are the characteristics of samsara and the characteristics of liberation. And of these 2, we have completed the discussion of the characteristics of samsara. So that's enough for this morning. And when you look at a teaching like this, sometimes it seems like this is really hard. So it seems that way, but be diligent. And if you're diligent, then you can understand it clearly. There actually is something here that you can understand. It's possible you can understand, you can realize the meaning of this practice, of these teachings. Actually, when we think about the treatises that were written by all of the great masters, there are some that sort of uncover the profound meanings. And so there are very profound hidden meanings that treatises will make clear. And then there are some that sort of gather together all the vast points. And so the Buddha taught things in many different places all over. And so gathering them all into one place, gathering the vast meaning. So this is the second type of treatise. It's gathering all the vast different things together. And because of that, it can seem really difficult at first. But what you really have to do there is you have to be diligent about it. If you're diligent, then you can develop the intelligence that knows it. And so in general, if you are diligent about it, if you're doing, for example, listening and study, then you need to be diligent about listening and studying. If you're contemplating, you need to be diligent about contemplating. And if you're meditating, you need to be diligent about your meditation. If you have good diligence, then you can understand this. Now, sometimes it's possible that you might think to yourself, I'm never going to be able to understand that. This is too difficult. And you get kind of depressed about this. And you think, I can't learn that. But actually, this is what we call the laziness of deprecating yourself. It's thinking, I can't do this. But actually, there's no need to think about it. There's no need not there's no need for lacking confidence in yourself. There's nothing that you can't do if you don't apply yourself. There are all the great masters, all the great Mahasiddhas, all of the great scholars of the past, who at first were just ordinary individuals. And yet, because they were diligent, they were able to accomplish the ultimate result. And so if you are diligent, you can understand this, you can know this. And so please be confident in yourself and please be diligent.